And I was telling Sati that when I present this in person, it's always the most challenging exercise of the 10-part series. So yeah, because we live in the age of non-cooperation. So to love is to cooperate. So more than a farewell request, Srila Prabhupada's desire that his followers cooperate to spread Krishna consciousness everywhere remains a perennial call to action. By May 1977, Srila Prabhupada's health had been declining for months. It was time to return to Vrindavan, India, his, quote, home, as he called it, to recover or depart. When his secretary suggested he make a will, Prabhupada agreed. For 7 years, he had been training the members of ISKCON's governing body commission, or GBC, to manage the society after his departure. To help them feel the gravity of their responsibility, Prabhupada requested they all come to Vrindavan to witness the will. Quote, because they love you, said his secretary, and that was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I'm sure they will all want to come and be with you, unquote. Prabhupada's reply was grave. Quote, your love for me will be shown by how much you cooperate to keep this institution together after I am gone, unquote. Notwithstanding Prabhupada's request, cooperation can be elusive in our age of quarrel. To see why, as well as what we can do to foster cooperation, we will sample Prabhupada's words on the subject, which reveal a simple yet challenging dialectic. Dialectic, it's a way of, it's a kind of logic where you arrive at a conclusion. So I discovered a Prabhupada dialectic, and it starts with, the first part is called thesis. Thesis. So in classic Socratic dialectic, you have thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So Prabhupada's thesis is cooperate. Despite Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's order that his leading disciples, quote, work conjointly and, quote, without any quarrel, after his demise, their non-cooperation fragmented the Gaudiya mission and later disqualified most of them from helping Prabhupada revive it in the West. Determined that non-cooperation not similarly spoil ISKCON, Prabhupada often defined and tested his disciples' devotion in terms of their willingness to work together. So here's a couple of quotes from early in his Leela, his pastimes with us, in the middle, and then, of course, we just heard at the end. Quote, when you do something in cooperation with the Lord, that is called bhakti. That was a 1968 quote. Prabhupada's defining bhakti as cooperating. And here's the next one, is from 1973. Quote, the test of our actual dedication and sincerity to serve the spiritual master will be in this mutual cooperative spirit to push on this movement and not make factions and deviate. So that's the opposite of cooperation, when we just split off and do our own thing and think we're right. The day he signed his will, Prabhupada echoed his previous observation about cooperation. Quote, your love for me will be tested by how, after my departure, you maintain this institution. We have glamour and people are feeling our weight. This should be maintained. Prabhupada using the word glamour here in the sense of prestige. This should be maintained. So that's the thesis, cooperate. At the beginning, in the middle, and the end of his Leela. Antithesis. So here's the counterpoint. Don't expect utopia. A couple of years after Prabhupada had formed the GBC, now we're going back to 1972, one of its members wrote to complain that impersonal dealings were dividing his colleagues. Prabhupada disagreed. So here's an excerpt from this letter. It is not so much that there may be some fault in our God brothers and God sisters, or because there may be some mismanagement or lack of cooperation, that this is due to being impersonalists. No, it is the nature of the living condition to always have some fault. So that's rather startling. Does that mean even in spiritual life, there's some fault? Prabhupada continues. Even in the spiritual world, there is some fault and envy, but it is not the same as material fault or material envy. It is transcendental because it is all based on Krishna. Sometimes when one devotee would serve Krishna very nicely, the others would say, "Oh, she has done so nicely. Now, let me do better for pleasing Krishna." And Prabhupada says, that is envy, but it is transcendental without malice, without hatred. Envy without malice. How wonderful. Prabhupada goes on in his letter. So we shall not expect that anywhere there is any utopia. Rather, that is impersonalism. People should not expect that even in the Krishna consciousness society, there will be utopia. Because devotees are persons, there will always be some lacking. But the difference is that their lackings have become transcendental because despite everything they may do, their topmost intention is to serve Krishna. So like a martial arts master using an opponent's negative energy to his advantage, Prabhupada then finished his point, challenging his disciple to see the positive. Quote, the devotees of Krishna are the most exalted persons on this planet, better than kings, all of them. So we should always remember that. And like the bumblebee, always look for the nectar or the best qualities of a person. Not like the utopians, who are like the flies, who always go to the open sores or find the faults in a person. And because they cannot find any utopia, or because they cannot find anyone without faults, they want to become void, merge, nothing. They think that is utopia, to become void of personality. So if there are sometimes slight disagreements between devotees, it is not due to impersonalism, but it is because they are persons. And such disagreements should not be taken very seriously. So that's the counterpoint. The point or the thesis was cooperate. The counterpoint or the antithesis is don't expect utopia. So if Prabhupada's thesis is to cooperate and his antithesis not to expect utopia, then what is his synthesis, his resolution? As we might expect, it's easier said than done. Synthesis, find unity in diversity. When another GBC man wrote to inform Prabhupada of more dissension in the ranks, Prabhupada's response was philosophical and proactive. Quote, this is Prabhupada's reply to this second complainer. Material nature means dissension and disagreement, but for this Krishna consciousness movement, its success will depend on agreement, even though there are varieties of engagements. In the material world, there are varieties, but there is no agreement. In the spiritual world, there are varieties, but there is agreement, unquote. So different individuals have different ways of performing devotional service. The agreement that harmonizes, quote, the varieties of engagements is their shared purpose to please Lord Krishna. And here's more from that second letter. Prabhupada wrote, the materialists cannot come into agreement with varieties, but if we keep Krishna in the center, then there will be agreement in varieties. This is called unity in diversity, unquote. To illustrate, Prabhupada would sometimes give the example of concentric circles. No matter how many circles we draw, if they all share the same center, they never clash. In the same way, even when differences arise, if pleasing Krishna is our shared intention, we'll at least be able to, quote, agree to disagree and continue working cooperatively to serve the Lord. Prabhupada knew this would be an ongoing challenge. So that in this last part of this second letter, Prabhupada makes what's become a famous request, especially to our GBC leaders. Quote, I am therefore suggesting that all our men meet in Mayapur every year during the birth anniversary of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. With all GBC and senior men present, we should discuss how to make unity and diversity. But if we fight on account of diversity, then it is simply the material platform. Please try to maintain the philosophy of unity in diversity. That will make our movement successful. So what I do now is I pursue this principle of unity and diversity. This section is called Unity in Principle, Diversity in Application. Since finding unity and diversity is the key to cooperation, Prabhupada's measure of our love for him, we need to dig deeper to understand how to achieve it. However diverse we may be, if we trust our mutual intentions to please Guru and Krishna, we'll be able to work together to identify timeless, universal principles whose applications will vary according to, quote, time, candidate, and country, unquote. Prabhupada explains. So this comes up in different purports, and here's one of my favorite from the CC. I think it's Madhya Lila, yeah. Chapter 23, text 105, and a purport to Lord Chaitanya instructing Sanatana Goswami. Quote, the teacher, Acharya, has to consider time, candidate, and country. What is possible in one country may not be possible in another. The Acharya's duty is to accept the essence of devotional service. It is not necessary that the rules and regulations followed in India be exactly the same as those in Europe, America, and other Western countries. We should not follow regulative principles without an effect, nor should we fail to accept the regulative principles. What is required is a special technique according to country, time, and candidate, unquote. Of course, even if the Acharya's, quote, special technique proves effective for spreading Krishna consciousness, advanced devotees may still disagree about its application. For example, while receiving a massage from his assistant one day, Prabhupada remarked, quote, my godbrothers criticize me that I have allowed women to live in our temples. This is not done in India, but I have become successful because I made this adjustment, unquote. In the silence that followed, his assistant's curiosity compelled him to ask, quote, Prabhupada, how can we tell the difference between making an adjustment and changing a principle? Right? Because principles are changeless. They're principles. They're universal. But then how you apply them, that's a detail. And that those do change according to time, country, and candidate. So it was a really good question. It was Shrutakirti in October 72 in Manila, Philippines. Prabhupada closed his eyes as his assistant continued to rub his body. Finally, he opened his eyes and responded, "That requires a little intelligence." So that's got to be the understatement of all time. A little intelligence. I mean, his own godbrothers couldn't understand why Prabhupada was doing what he was doing. A little intelligence. So a little intelligence and a lot of heart. In his commentary to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 7, text 37, Prabhupada describes the compassionate intent of such intelligence. Quote, "An acharya should devise a means by which people may somehow or other come to Krishna consciousness. First, they should become Krishna conscious, and all the prescribed rules and regulations may later gradually be introduced. For example, since boys and girls in the Western countries freely intermingle, special concessions regarding their customs and habits are necessary to bring them to Krishna consciousness. The acharya must devise a means to bring them to devotional service." Unquote. For Prabhupada, bringing someone to devotional service was the highest principle, requiring bold applications for changing times. For instance, in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's Gaudiya mission, many devotees used to chant 64 rounds of the Hare Krishna mantra on their beads. Despite Prabhupada suggesting fewer rounds to his first followers, 32, then 25, they still looked perplexed. That would take hours. He then declared 16 rounds daily, the rock bottom minimum for his initiated disciples. When one of those early initiates later asked Prabhupada why he had asked them to chant so many rounds, this is Brahmananda later on asking Prabhupada why he had started so high, why he had asked them to chant so many rounds, then reduce the number, Prabhupada replied that he was, quote, experimenting to see what the devotees could do. To determine a principle's practical application, Prabhupada would often try something out and then, quote, judge by the result. That was one of Prabhupada's favorite sayings. It's Bengali. Phalena parachiyate. You have to judge a thing by its result. Okay, we're still drilling down on how to find unity and diversity, the key to cooperation. So the next section is called Humility Helps. At one point, while instructing Sanatana Goswami, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu stopped to marvel at his humble disciple. Quote, "Since you possess Lord Krishna's potency, you certainly know these things. However, it is the nature of a sadhu to inquire. Although he knows these things, the sadhu inquires for the sake of strictness." Unquote. Prabhupada wrote no commentary to this text, but later he did speak about it. This was in New York, 1976. Quote, "A sadhu, a saintly person, although he knows everything, still he remains very humble and tries to confirm from the higher authorities. I think this is right. Is it not right? He knows it is all right, but still he waits for the higher authority to confirm it." Unquote. So strict in remembering his absolute smallness, strict in never presuming he knows everything, The humble devotee is always glad to hear deeper realizations from sincere devotees whom he regards as his prabhus or masters. Because he trusts the devotee's intentions, they trust his, and everyone is happy to cooperate with him, even if they sometimes disagree. In the Mahabharata, the model of the humble hero is King Yudhisthira, and the arrogant fool, King Duryodhana. When they were mere adolescents, their martial arts guru, Dronacharya, gave them each an assignment to test their character. This is the way Drona got to know his students. He would test their character. To Yudhisthira, he commanded, "Bring me someone less than you." And to Duryodhana, "Bring me someone more than you." Even as the assignments were spoken, Duryodhana's mind was already complaining. Why did Yudhisthira receive the easy task? How will I ever find anyone greater than me? Later that day, Duryodhana fulfilled his own prophecy by returning to his master alone. Quote, "I'm sorry, Guru Maharaj. I could not find anyone greater than me." Unquote. Drona raised his eyebrows, but kept silent. So Drona got a real good earful of the character of Duryodhana by that reply. Now twilight came and still no Yudhisthira. Finally at dusk, he returned, alone and disappointed. Quote, "I'm sorry, Guru Maharaj. I looked high and low. Finally, I saw a man with some grain on a Kadashi. I thought he was going to eat it, but then he fed it to his animal. So I gave up. How will I ever find anyone less than me?" Unquote. Jonah smiled, as we might too. But am I more like Yudhisthira or Duryodhana? Sanatan or Satan? If I think there is no one with whom I need to check my understanding, no authority higher than myself, then I need to give up the arrogance of Duryodhana and embrace the humility of Yudhisthira. Genuine humility enables us to appreciate and learn from all devotees, excuse me, and cooperate with them to please Srila Prabhupada, Guru, and Krishna. So humility really helps in the whole point of cooperation. So now it's time for me to remind you, Prabhus, to be thinking about questions to ask at the end, which we are fast approaching, because this section is called One Last Word. On March 16th, 1976, in the holy land of Sridham Mayapur, along the Ganges' green expanse, dozens of young Americans crowded into Srila Prabhupada's room at ISKCON's international headquarters. He thanked them for cooperating to profusely distribute his books for the benefit of suffering humanity. This was all the 100 Radha Damodar book distributor brahmachari book distributors who had won what we called in those days the Christmas Marathon. They distributed more books than any other entity. So they were awarded the prize of going to Mayapur and having personal darshan with Srila Prabhupada. So, but here's, interestingly enough, here's what Prabhupada chose as his main message to these book distributors. He didn't just pat them on the back and, cheerlead them on, but he chose to speak about cooperation, because Prabhupada's vision is always far-reaching. Okay, so now you're cooperating, but what about, in the long term. So here's Prabhupada's essential quote from that talk. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is God himself, Krishna himself. He felt alone, unable to do this task. He felt. So this is the position. You are cooperating. Therefore, I am getting the credit. Otherwise, alone, what could I do? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself wanted our cooperation. He is God, Krishna, and therefore cooperation is a very important thing. Nobody should think that I have got so great ability, I can do. No, it is simply by cooperation we can do very big things. United we stand, divided we fall. Sankirtan. Sankirtan means many combined together, chanting. That is Sankirtan. Otherwise, Kirtan. Sankirtan means many, many combined together. That is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, unquote. That's a very revealing quote, and that I was giving Prabhupada the last word in how to find cooperation. So, okay, Prabhus, I'll be very happy to hear your questions and comments now. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Sureshvara Prabhu. We have quite a question. What is true humility in Krishna consciousness, and from whom we can learn it?
What is true humility in Krishna consciousness? And the second part was?
From whom can we learn it?
From whom can we learn it?
Yeah.
Okay. Good question. Yeah, humility is a big challenge for us in the material world because we've come here because we thought we could be the supreme enjoyer. So we come here out of false pride. And that's the opposite of humility. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, texts 8 through 12, there's many, many items of knowledge Krishna lists. And the first one is amanatvam, which means humility. And in his comments on that section, Prabhupada said, he just says something very simple. Humility means not to be eager for the satisfaction of being honored by others. That desire for profit, adoration, and distinction, that's always kind of lurking, even as we practice bhakti. We're craving some kind of honor as a kind of leftover mentality from our material world. Of course, the other side of that is that it's the way of the Vaishnavas and the duty of the Vaishnavas to encourage each other and to appreciate Vaishnavas. So Vaishnavas, real devotees, show appreciation for fellow Vaishnavas. But what's that third shikshastak? Amanina amanadena. Yeah. So a real devotee is always eager to honor other devotees, but is not eager to be honored himself. So how do we learn that? We learn that from people who are like that. And those people are, who are really completely like that, they're pretty rare. We're always grossly or subtly inserting ourselves in the center of the conversation or inviting others to honor us. It's kind of like, that's an old habit since time immemorial. But once in a while, you meet a devotee who's not like that. And it's so refreshing. Yeah. So that's the way to do it. So if you ever meet a devotee like that, you'll see how they are. And here's something you'll notice. It's the paradox, right? That we always seek honor, and then when we don't get it, you know, we get a little frustrated. But you know, that desire for honor, it's because it's always kind of there. It's a little like an itch that you wish somebody would scratch your itch, right? Pat you on the back, and but it makes for a dissatisfied mind when you're always if I'm hankering for that, then it's you're never satisfied. You always want more. It's kind of like lust, right? You're lusting for adoration. But you notice somebody who really doesn't crave that and isn't hankering for that, that's a peaceful devotee. Yeah. That's a real peaceful devotee. Just happy to serve. Doesn't crave the honor. Yeah. So I think that's the best I can do. Not being, you know, I have to confess, you know, I can detect that in myself. So you'll have to look elsewhere, Prabhus. Sorry, don't have any more realizations on that one. But it's a good question.
Maybe you could share with us some names of devotees you consider to be good examples of humility from your point of view. Maybe you can tell us something about that.
Well, yesterday on Zoom, I was very happy to participate in the Vyasa Puja, the birthday of Satsarup Maharaj. And people were tuning in, you know, from all over, I think about 150 people. And so that was a common theme that came up time and again. Satsarup Maharaj, and this didn't come up, but one thing that came up with me and Shesha Prabhu, my godbrother GBC, Minister of Justice, Minister of Education, we learn about Prabhupada from Satsarup Maharaj because he so much reflects in so many ways Prabhupada's qualities. And I just thought of the story that Satsarup Maharaj has written and also told of how he didn't go to he had an opportunity to be among the first batch of people to be initiated at 26 2nd Avenue on September 8th, 1966. But he didn't go. He didn't go because there was a part of him that was kind of holding out, as he put it, for more love from Swamiji, more appreciation, more adoration, right? So he, instead of going to the initiation and being in the first batch, the first group, he stayed in his apartment. I don't think he had any work that day. He was a worker at the New York City welfare. He was a caseworker at the welfare department. But it may have been the weekend, and he just chose, instead of going, he chose to do a lot of typing for Swamiji, because he was a writer, and he was a good typist. So Swamiji had given a whole batch of manuscripts, you know, to type and clean up, to make it in proper native English, because Prabhupada, of course, was writing in Indian English. So he typed up a whole bunch. I mean, he just typed and typed and typed. And then the next day, the day after the initiation, he went with this big bundle of papers to Swamiji to present his service, which he was anticipating that Swamiji would be so happy because he'd given him back so much edited or cleaned up English manuscript. So Swamiji thanked him. And Prabhupada, he always knew the mentality of his disciples. He could really read minds like that. That was a mystic power. So he knew the mentality with which Stephen, he was still Stephen, was giving him the work back. And so Swamiji said, thank you very much. And he gave him a few grapes, prasad, just a little, there was hardly any money in those days. So Prabhupada, after class, he would cut up an apple and share the parts of the apple. So he just gave Stephen a few grapes. So then Sureshvara said, so I was thinking in my mind, what? I worked all day and into the night, and he only gives me a few grapes? That's how he was thinking. So then Swamiji, reading his mind, said something that changed Stephen's life. He said, don't think that this is some, business arrangement that that we're just working kind of like as a business, like in the business world or like in the world, you work, you serve the boss, but then you get a paycheck. So you're really working for the paycheck. It's not because you love the boss. So Prabhupada was trying to teach Stephen a lesson. He said, don't think this is like ordinary business. If you love me, then I will love you. So Stephen had been holding out for more love. And Swamiji is assuring him, if you love me, if you do this out of love, I won't disappoint you. I will love you unconditionally. And that really went deep into Stephen's heart. So 2 weeks later on Radhastami, Stephen took initiation as Satsarup Das Brahmachari. So yesterday, many who were sharing, we were sharing how our Prabhupada, how we know and how we understand Prabhupada is very sweetly and deeply influenced by Satsarup Maharaj's Prabhupada. So there's one. That's the one I know best. I mean, there are many leaders in our movement who evince humility, but I think I'll just leave it at that because that's the one I know best.
Thank you. Can we talk a little bit deeper about unity and diversity? I understand unity is to cooperate, and you've talked extensively about it. Thank you.
Say that again. Unity is what?
Is to cooperate.
Cultivate? To
cooperate.
Well, yeah, unity and diversity. I said, how do you? The key to finding unity and diversity is to cooperate, right? Work and cooperate. What does it literally mean? It means work together.
No, that's not the question. The question is, what is diversity? What it includes? And how far it goes?
Sure. So unity and diversity. Good question, because unity and diversity doesn't mean, as I like to joke, unity and perversity. It doesn't mean anything goes. So unity, as I mentioned in the talk, means that we recognize principles that we can all agree on. Like the regulative principles, we're not going to, adjust that. Don't try to change the principles. And in Prabhupada's ISKCON Sangha, we don't tamper with the rounds. Prabhupada, he did experiment as the Founder-Acarya. He started high, 32, then 25, and still the devotees were like flabbergasted. They couldn't believe anybody could chant that many rounds. So then Prabhupada said, all right, rock bottom, 16 rounds minimum, no less. So we agree on universally accepted things, but diversity means how we apply the principles according to, as Prabhupada said, the time, the country, and the people. And then Prabhupada, in that excerpt I read, he was talking about how the way you spread Krishna consciousness, introduce and spread it in India, for example, with one kind of culture, will be very different. It won't be the same as you spread it, say, in Russia or in America or Europe or whatever, South America, because it's a different culture. So Prabhupada gave the example of the Western countries where boys and girls freely intermingle. So he let boys and girls serve together in the same centers, and his godbrothers criticized him for that. But they didn't know how to adjust things. Now, that's a good example, serve together in the same center. But it's not that anything goes. We have etiquettes. So the diversity is Prabhupada applying principles. Prabhupada's highest principle was giving everybody an opportunity to become Krishna conscious. And then the rules and regulations would follow later. That Prabhupada was quoting Rupa Goswami, Yena Tena Prakarena. Somehow or other, get people to be Krishna conscious. Mana Krishna Naveshayet. Sarve Vidhi Nishedhasyor, all those vidhis, all those rules and regulations. Etayor Eva Kinkaraha, should be made servants of this highest principle, which that everybody become Krishna conscious. So Prabhupada went so far as to say that because he made that adjustment, allowing boys and girls, young men and young women, to serve together in his centers, he said he'd become successful. So now, how do you know when an adjustment doesn't work? Or how do you know when adjustment is a deviation instead of a legitimate adjustment of a principle? It's when it doesn't work. It's when, by making that adjustment, what's the test of the adjustment? Is that people actually become more Krishna conscious. So if they don't become more Krishna conscious, then, stop that, application of the principle. But when it's enhancing, enriching, and deepening everyone's Krishna consciousness, then it's good. It's a suitable adjustment according to the time, the place, the people. So the biggest challenge in unity and diversity is agreeing on what's a universal principle. If you examine most of our squabbles in ISKCON, it's all about that. It's what are actual timeless universal principles and what are adjustable details, applications of those principles. That's the hard part. If we can just agree on the principles, then it's not really hard to see how those principles can be adjusted according to time, country, and candidate. So what enables us to actually agree on what are universal principles? Well, as I mentioned a couple of times in the talk, we have to start somewhere. We have to start with the basic trust that our real intent, the real motivation we have, is to serve Guru and Krishna, not to serve our own selves and not to set ourselves up as imitation Prabhupads or whatever. Not to make ourselves the measure of all things and that I know better and nobody else knows better. I'm not leaving ISKCON. ISKCON is leaving me. Sometimes people have said that. That's arrogance. That's completely self-centered proclamations, declarations. So unity and diversity, we have to unite around principles. And how do we, so we have to trust? Yeah. And then once we trust each other, and how does that happen? By getting to know each other. by really getting to know each other as persons, not as ideologues or fanatics. From a distance, it's very easy to judge others. Oh, this person's from India, he thinks like this. This person's from America, he thinks like that. No, but actually sit down, preferably with the help of a trained mediator or facilitator, and get to know each other as human beings. And then the more you hear each other's needs, interests, and concerns, then you appreciate their sincerity. And then even if you disagree with them, sometimes that's about as good as unity and diversity gets. We agree to disagree, but we don't hate each other. We don't demonize each other. And we can still work together, even if we have different points of view. So that's a real challenge, because it's so easy to slip in this, judgmental mode and demonizing the other. And, that's insincerity. Yeah. So unity and diversity does not mean unity and perversity. There are such things as timeless principles, but we really have to identify them. And then once we do that, then we may not know the exact application of the principle for this particular time and country and people. So sometimes we have to do what Prabhupada did. We have to try something out, make a little experiment. And then palena parachiyate, judge a thing by the result. Are people becoming more or less Krishna conscious? More, then it's good. It's a legitimate application of the principle. Less, then no, it's a mistake. And we have to pull back. And Prabhupada himself did that with us. Good question. Okay.
Yes, thank you for a very good answer. Very detailed.
It's practically it's what I call the holy grail, the eternal quest of the Hare Krishna movement. That's why Prabhupada said, so all big leaders in GBC, you meet every year and to discuss how to find unity and diversity. Because Prabhupada well knew what a challenge that would be. As ISKCON grew, the diversity would just get more and more and more. So we got to find the unity amidst all that. That's the big challenge of the Hare Krishna movement.
Yeah, and you said that Prabhupada wanted us to help ISKCON remain united, not to create factions.
Right.
So, can you share with us your understanding why it is important that ISKCON would be one thing? Why it shouldn't be fractions? Because even if it were fractions, at some point, these fractions would still serve Krishna.
So let me try to make sure I understand. That was a quote. I was saying it was a letter to a godbrother of mine who was sincere, but he had a tendency to criticize, and Prabhupada perhaps detected in him a desire to leave, himself become the first of a faction, a split. Well, just remember that last quote. I gave Prabhupada the last word in cooperation, and Prabhupada's making the point. He was saying, oh, I'm an old man. What could I do? I could, but because you are helping me, look what we're doing. I'm getting the credit for so many books produced and distributed. Otherwise, alone, what could I do? Well, of course, Prabhupada did so much on his own, but he brought with him those three parts to the first canto. It was in 3 parts in those days, his Indian Bhagavatams, Indian English Bhagavatams. But then when he got followers, my God, it was an explosion of book production, book distribution. So that's a great example. United we stand, divided we fall. We can do much more together than we can alone or in our own little factions. So, but if we crack the nut, if we find the if we understand what unity and diversity means, it doesn't mean everybody has to be the same. No, diversity, unity and diversity. But it means that we're basically all united around our Founder-Acharya to please his desires to spread, to facilitate or to fulfill his desires to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, but in diverse ways. So whether that diversity is legitimate or if it's perverse, that's what Prabhupada wanted the leaders especially to discuss every year in Mayapur. So, but at least we should understand the principle that if we just go off in a huff, in an angry way, oh, I didn't get my way, I'm going to leave now and start my own version of the Hare Krishna movement. But that's not helpful. We could do so much more together. And that actually happened in Prabhupada's own time with the devotees who were, this devotee, I don't know if I mentioned Siddha Sarup Ananda Goswami. I don't know if I mentioned him, but that was the first full-blown kind of faction in ISKCON. And he had his allies in New Zealand. Siddha Sarup was a charismatic spiritual leader in Hawaii, and then he brought his disciples to Prabhupada, but he never quite integrated with ISKCON. He always had his own ideas, and he found some like-minded people in New Zealand. So they kind of broke away, but Prabhupada was always trying to encourage them. They called themselves the Hari Bol. The Hari Bols. They were disturbed by ISKCON's book distribution, and they didn't like deity worship. So those are two. That's two of the big five. Panchanga Bhakti. Two of the big five of the 64 principles. There's 5 that are most essential, and so, but they had problems with worshiping the deity and distributing books. So, but Prabhupada, he saw there was some sincerity there. So he was always trying to encourage them, and but they never quite integrated. But he still appreciated them, and even the ISKCON devotees in New Zealand were wondering if Prabhupada thought that they were, bona fide, if they were as bona fide as the ISKCON temple in Auckland. So Prabhupada said, no, they're not. But I'm trying, look, it's my duty to fan the spark of sincerity. So there is some sincerity there. And he was hoping that they would come around, but they never did. So yeah, factions are just the opposite of cooperation. Cooperation means work together. But if I am so self-centered that if I can't get my way, then I leave, then what's the use of that? Then everything splits up into so many pieces, and we can't get as much accomplished. Because the bottom line for Prabhupada, to be a Prabhupada Nuga, is to imbibe the cooperative preaching spirit of increasing the family of devotees all over the world. And that takes organization and intelligence, as Prabhupada told Giriraj Swami. So it doesn't mean everybody has to be the same and have to have the same emphasis, and we can't be individuals. And no, that's natural. That's, as Prabhupada told that person in the first letter, it's because they're persons. That's why there's disagreements. But still, we can work out our disagreements if we unite around the center of pleasing Prabhupada and Krishna, and we can agree to disagree. That's all. That's sometimes, again, that's as good as it gets amongst people who really have different natures. But we're not going to, split ISKCON or make some factions, Prabhupada said in that letter, and deviate. Prabhupada saw that as a deviation. That's not sincere when you deviate and you go off on your own. So it requires some maturity, some intelligence to understand how we can be individuals we can be, but we need to unite around Prabhupada's desires, to have a united ISKCON and go forward together. We can just, we're just so much more effective in reaching people when we're united, even if we have our differences. I think that's the best I can do on that one.
I thought that thank you very much for this class. And maybe you could tell us about our next session, which will probably be next Sunday on the 13th.
Right, every Sunday now until the 20th. That'll be our Christmas farewell lesson. So transition. Before we look at different ways to access and develop a personal loving relationship with Srila Prabhupada, in lesson 9, we'll examine and clear up some misunderstandings we may have about Srila Prabhupada. So the name of the lesson is Fictional Prabhupads. Fictional. Make-believe. Fictional means it's not true. So by fictional, I mean illusory, make-believe, or just wrong. Because we can't really enter into authentic, deep relationships with Srila Prabhupada if we have fundamental misunderstandings about him. And I break these down into two kinds: impersonal misunderstandings and sentimental misunderstandings. So it's a different kind of lesson. We exorcise demons. We cast out the demons of impersonalism and sentimentalism so that the true Prabhupada can emerge. So I think you'll like it.
Jai,
I look forward. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. We're all on.
Yeah, it's a different lesson. It stands out as a different kind of lesson.
Yeah, I think every year lesson is quite special.
Okay, Prabhu, so nice to be with my Russian-speaking friends whom I can't even see, but whose sincerity I can always feel, even across the miles. Hare Krishna.